What really killed F1's greatest legends? Formula One sells speed, 200 miles an hour, inches from a wall, on tires no wider than a dinner plate. For decades, the sport asked its greatest drivers to make peace with a brutal, simple math. Sooner or later, someone doesn't walk away. One of them cheated death once, spectacularly, surviving a fire that should have killed him instantly, only to lose the fight, quietly, more than 4 decades later. Another's death grew out of a betrayal by his own teammate, and one single weekend, in the spring of 1994, took 2 of the sport's own in under 24 hours and changed Formula One forever. These are the true stories behind the deaths that shook Formula One. Jim Clark. By the mid-1960s, Jim Clark wasn't just winning, he was making it look unnecessary to try. 2 world championships. A driving style so smooth that other drivers swore you could balance a full cup of water on his dashboard and never spill a drop. If any driver alive seemed too careful, too controlled, too good to die behind the wheel, it was Jim Clark. On April 7, 1968, Clark wasn't even competing in a championship Grand Prix. Just a minor Formula 2 race at Hockenheim, Germany, on a gray, drizzling afternoon. The track cut straight through dense pine forest, the trees standing only feet from the racing line. Flat out through a fast section of the circuit, his Lotus suddenly speared off the road without warning. No spin, no visible mistake. Nothing in the footage from other drivers explained it. The car hit the trees almost head-on. Jim Clark was killed instantly. He was 32. Investigators later suspected a slow rear tire deflation, a fault so small, so unremarkable, that it had ended the life of the man many still call the most complete racing driver who ever lived. If it could happen to Clark, the paddock realized, it could happen to anyone. 14 years later, another driver just as beloved would die chasing something more personal than a lap time. Revenge for a promise broken by his own teammate, Gilles Villeneuve. Ferrari fans didn't just admire Gilles Villeneuve, they adored him for the same fearless all-or-nothing driving that terrified his own team. 2 weeks before his death, that fearlessness curdled into fury. At the San Marino Grand Prix, Villeneuve believed his teammate Didier Pironi had broken an unspoken agreement to hold position and stolen a win from him in the closing laps. Villeneuve was reportedly furious and told those close to him he'd never speak to Pironi again. He got the chance to make a statement instead. On May 8, 1982, during final qualifying for the Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder, Villeneuve threw everything into one last lap, determined to beat his teammates' time. Coming up fast behind a slower car, the two collided. Villeneuve's Ferrari launched into the air, tumbling violently across the track, disintegrating as it went. He was thrown from the cockpit, still strapped into his seat, and came to rest in the catch fencing beyond the track. He died from his injuries later that evening. He was 32. Quebec and much of Canada grieved as though it had lost a national hero. 15 years later, his son Jacques Villeneuve would win the world championship his father never got to. But no single weekend in the sport's history did more damage than the one that arrived 12 years after Zolder. A tragedy that struck twice in 2 days. Ayrton Senna. There may never be a driver as universally worshipped as Ayrton Senna. 3 world championships. A near mythical gift for driving in the rain, when everyone else was simply trying to survive it. In Brazil, he wasn't just a sportsman. He was a source of national pride through some of the country's hardest years. The weekend of May 1st, 1994, had already turned dark before Senna even got in the car. A day earlier, at that very same San Marino Grand Prix, a rookie named Roland Ratzenberger had been killed in a horrifying qualifying crash. The first driver lost at a Formula One race weekend in over a decade. Senna, a man who'd raced against death and beaten it more times than anyone, was seen in tears and reportedly considered not racing at all. He raced anyway. On lap 7, his Williams left the track at the Tamburello corner at nearly 190 miles an hour and struck the concrete retaining wall almost head-on. A piece of the car's suspension drove back into the cockpit. Ayrton Senna suffered a catastrophic head injury. He was airlifted to a hospital in Bologna, where he was pronounced dead later that afternoon. He was 34. Marshals cutting him from the wreckage found an Austrian flag folded inside the cockpit, one he'd planned to raise after the race in tribute to Ratzenberger. He never got the chance. Brazil declared 3 days of national mourning. An estimated 3 million people lined the streets of São Paulo for his funeral procession. In the years that followed, his death forced Formula One to rebuild itself, almost entirely around driver safety. No one else would lose their life to a Grand Prix crash for the next 20 years. When that streak finally, tragically ended, it happened to a 25-year-old with his whole career still ahead of him, Jules Bianchi. Jules Bianchi was supposed to be the future, a Ferrari junior driver on the rise, racing for the small Marussia team while he waited for his big break. On October 5th, 2014, that future was taken from him at the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka, in torrential rain from an approaching typhoon. Under double-waved warning flags, a recovery crane had been sent out to remove another driver's crashed car. Moments later, Bianchi's Marussia lost grip on the very same patch of standing water and slammed into the crane at full racing speed. A collision far more violent than any impact with a wall or barrier could have been. He suffered a severe brain injury and was placed in an induced coma. For 9 months, the world waited for news, hoping. On July 17, 2015, Jules Bianchi died from his injuries. He was 25, the first driver lost to a Grand Prix crash since Senna, 21 years earlier. His death fast-tracked one of the most important safety devices in the sport's history, the halo, a titanium bar arching over the cockpit, now fitted to every Formula One car. 6 years after Bianchi's crash, when Romain Grosjean's car split in half and burst into flames at 137 miles an hour, he climbed out of the fire and walked away. Many in the sport believe he owes his life to the very piece of metal that exists because of what happened to Jules. But of everyone on this list, one driver's story doesn't end at the crash at all. It began there, and it took the sport 43 years to finish it. Niki Lauda. In August of 1976, Niki Lauda had already tried to get an entire Grand Prix cancelled. The old Nürburgring Nordschleife. 14 miles of blind crests and forest with almost no medical support, was, in his own words, too dangerous to race. The drivers voted. He lost. On lap 2 of that very race, his Ferrari suffered a suspected suspension failure at high speed, launching it off the track and into flames. The car bounced back onto the circuit, where it was struck again by another driver before anyone could stop it. Lauda was trapped inside the fire for nearly a minute before a handful of fellow drivers pulled him out by hand. He suffered severe burns, but the real damage was invisible. Toxic fumes had scarred his lungs and poisoned his blood. At the hospital, doctors didn't expect him to survive the night. A priest was called to administer the last rites. Niki Lauda survived. Astonishingly, he returned to race just 6 weeks later at Monza, blood still seeping through the bandages wrapped around his head, and went on to win 2 more world championships. But the lungs he'd burned in 1976 never fully recovered. Decades of slowly declining health finally caught up with him. A lung transplant in 2018, followed by complications that never fully resolved. On May 20th, 2019, Niki Lauda died peacefully, surrounded by his family. He was 70. The fire that should have killed him in under a minute took 43 years to finish the job. Every redesigned barrier, every reinforced cockpit, the halo sitting over every driver's head today. All of it exists because of the names on this list. Men who didn't die so the sport could stay the same, but whose deaths forced it to change, one tragedy at a time. If one of these stories stuck with you more than the others, let me know which one in the comments. Subscribe for more of these deep dives into the moments sport would rather forget. And I'll see you in the next one.